Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight we're traveling to the frozen edges of the world with 10 true Alaskan horror stories. Encounters that prove the real danger isn't always the cold. It's what's hiding in the dark. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, let's step into the frozen unknown together. Story number 1. I was coiling line on the stern when the radio crackled with a burst of static that made me pause mid-motion. It wasn't unusual for chatter to break through on the VHF, but this voice was different. High, frantic, and not in English. At first I thought it was a bad frequency overlap from some Russian trawler, but the words, though muffled, were sharp enough to recognize as someone calling for help. A woman's voice. She sounded terrified, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up instantly. I grabbed the handset and tried to tune the channel clearer. Say again, I said, my voice a little shaky. The reply was just more of her, crying out in Russian, the cadence unmistakable, like someone shouting, "Pomagite! Help me." My crewmate, Jeff, who was sorting crab in the hold, came up when he heard me swearing under my breath. "Who's that?" he asked, peering at the radio. I shook my head. "A woman. Russian, I think. She's in trouble." We both looked toward the empty horizon, ocean stretching black and endless, with not a light in sight except for our own running lamps. The Coast Guard kept tabs on everyone out here, so I hailed them immediately. "Unidentified distress call, female voice, possibly Russian," I reported. A moment later, the Coast Guard came back, calm as always. "Negative contacts in your vicinity. No Russian vessels registered near St. Paul at this time." Their response should have reassured me, but instead I felt a wave of cold dread. If no ship was out there, where was she calling from? Her voice came again, cutting through clearer this time. It sounded like she was closer, though I knew that was impossible. She was gasping between words, as if water was already in her throat. Jeff cursed under his breath. "Man, that's someone dying out there. We can't just sit here." I wanted to argue logic. How could she be transmitting with no vessel, no beacon, nothing on radar? But logic felt thin compared to the sound of her pleading voice echoing inside our small wheelhouse. We turned the boat slowly, searching with the spotlight, but the beam only carved shimmering lines across waves. Nothing. No debris, no flares, not even gulls circling. Another deckhand, Manny, stumbled out half asleep and listened to the broadcast with us. He muttered something about old Russian wrecks, boats that had gone down years ago. I snapped at him to shut it, because the last thing I needed was ghost talk. This was real. It had to be. The radio kept pulsing with her cries, not continuous, but bursts every few minutes. Each time the Coast Guard came back with the same answer. No contacts, no vessels, no explanation. I asked them if it was a prank, some frequency bounce from Siberia. They said unlikely. My skin felt clammy, and I noticed Jeff wouldn't stop wringing his hands, pacing the deck like a trapped dog. After 2 hours, the desperation in her voice started to change. At first, she was screaming. Then it shifted into broken sobs, the kind of sound that made my chest hurt. And then, this part I will never forget, it sounded like she was whispering directly into my ear. Not over the radio, but close, too close, like someone leaning in beside me. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the mic. Manny went pale, saying he'd heard it too, that it wasn't coming from the speaker but from the air itself, filling the cabin. Jeff shouted that he was going topside, and he ran out, scanning the sea with his bare eyes. I followed him onto the deck. The wind burned my cheeks, and the spray tasted metallic, like pennies. Jeff was staring into the waves, stiff as a post. I grabbed his shoulder and shook him. "There's nothing there. I told him. But he just whispered, "She's right there. Don't you hear her?" I listened, really listened, over the throb of the engines and the groan of the sea. For a second, I swore I caught it. The faintest cry, not through electronics, but out in the open night. A woman's voice, rising and falling with the waves, as if the ocean itself was carrying her. My chest tightened, and panic clawed at me. I yelled for Manny to cut the engine, and suddenly, the silence that followed was unbearable. The only sound was that distant, fragile voice floating somewhere just beyond reach. We argued, the three of us, about what to do. Jeff was convinced we had to launch the skiff and look. Manny shouted that we'd die in seas like this. I was torn between them, because my gut told me there was no one out there, but my heart felt ripped apart by the thought of leaving someone to drown. And all the while, the radio spat more fragments of Russian words, weaker and weaker. At around 3 a.m., the voice stopped suddenly. The silence was heavier than any storm. We sat in the wheelhouse, waiting, straining, praying it was over. Then the Coast Guard called again, their voice steady. "We've logged your report. No vessels found. Suggest you resume normal operations." Normal. As if anything about this night could ever be normal again. I thought that was the end of it, until Jeff stood up abruptly, eyes wide and glassy. He didn't look at me or Manny. He just walked straight out onto the deck, muttering under his breath. At first I thought he was just going to smoke, calm his nerves. But then he climbed up onto the railing. I screamed his name and ran for him. He turned his head just enough for me to see his face in the light. A face that looked almost peaceful, like he'd made up his mind about something. "She's calling me," he said softly, and before I could grab him, he pitched forward into the black water. I lunged, almost toppling after him, but Manny caught my arm and yanked me back. We scrambled for the spotlight, for ropes, for anything. The beam swept the waves, but there was no trace of Jeff. No splash, no struggle, no sound at all. It was as if the sea had swallowed him whole the instant he touched it. I screamed into the night, my throat raw, calling his name until my voice cracked. Nothing came back. The radio stayed dead silent after that. No woman's cries, no static, nothing. Just the faint hum of the equipment, mocking us. Manny sat with his head in his hands, whispering prayers in Spanish, refusing to look up. I gripped the wheel with white knuckles and turned us back toward harbor, though I don't even remember deciding to. It was instinct, survival taking over. When we finally reached St. Paul, the Coast Guard interviewed us. They searched the waters, the coastline, everything. No sign of Jeff. They asked about the woman's voice, about the recordings, but the tapes, because every transmission gets logged, came back empty. Nothing but our own responses, our own frantic voices echoing into static. They told us stress could play tricks on the mind, that maybe we'd all hallucinated. 3 men, all hallucinating the same Russian woman at once? I didn't buy it. For weeks, I replayed that night over and over in my head. I questioned every choice, every hesitation. Should I have tied Jeff down when he started acting strange? Should I have believed the voice less or more? The guilt gnawed at me until sleep became impossible. I heard her sometimes, even back on shore, soft, wet whispers curling at the edge of hearing, always when I was alone. It's been years since then, and I've left the boats behind. People ask why, and I tell them the truth. I can't stand the sound of radios anymore. Even a crackle of static makes my chest seize up. And I don't go near the sea at night. Because out there, in the dark, I know she's still calling. And sometimes, when I let myself drift too far into memory, I think about Jeff's last words. She's calling me. And I wonder if one night, when the static returns, she'll be calling me too. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. Story number 2. I was halfway through my shift when the first patient staggered in coughing so hard he had to clutch the wall for balance. Sandpoint was small enough that you knew every face, and this one belonged to a fisherman named Carl. He looked pale, his eyes wet and heavy, and when he tried to speak, he broke into another fit of hacking. I helped him into a chair, got his vitals, and started the intake. That's when the door pushed open again, and more people shuffled in. By noon, the clinic was full of bodies in various stages of fever, sneezing, and exhaustion. It spread like wildfire. I remember thinking that half the town must have caught it overnight. I was drowning in patients, running from room to room, trying to keep track of who needed fluids, who was too weak to sit up, who couldn't stop vomiting. My head spun with names and numbers and temperatures. Then, in the middle of that chaos, she appeared. I didn't notice the door open or hear footsteps. One moment I was pressing a stethoscope to a little boy's chest, and the next, when I turned around, there she was. A woman in a crisp white nurse's uniform, standing at the counter with a clipboard in hand, already jotting something down like she'd worked there forever. I should have been relieved. I needed help so badly that morning. I remember blurting, "Thank God," before I even thought about it. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Where do you need me most?" Her voice was soft but firm. No hesitation. It was the kind of tone that settled nerves immediately. I pointed her toward the treatment room, where a mother was struggling to hold her feverish daughter upright. Without a word, she crossed the hall, slipped on gloves, and took over. The mother visibly relaxed, and so did I. For hours she worked beside me. She moved fast, almost too fast, but never seemed sloppy. She carried herself with absolute confidence, sliding needles in without hesitation, adjusting IV drips like second nature, lifting patients onto gurneys as though she knew every inch of that clinic. People started asking her questions instead of me, and I didn't mind. In fact, I remember feeling embarrassed at how clumsy I looked next to her efficiency. I asked her name once, but she didn't answer directly. She just said, "It's in the logbook." I was too busy to press. At some point I noticed she didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't even pause to wipe her forehead. I was sweating through my scrubs, gasping for a moment just to sip water, but she carried on like a machine. When I stepped outside the exam room to grab more supplies, I glanced back through the window in the door. She was holding the little girl's hand, speaking to her in a tone so calm that the child stopped crying, her lips curling into a sleepy half-smile despite the fever. The sight nearly brought me to tears, because I hadn't had a second to give anyone comfort that day. By evening, the flow of patients slowed. Some were stable enough to go home, others stayed overnight on cots in the ward. I finally leaned back against the wall, every muscle trembling. The woman stood by the counter, finishing a set of notes. I remember walking toward her to thank her properly. But when I passed through the doorway, she wasn't there anymore. I thought maybe she'd stepped outside, so I searched. I checked the supply closet, the ward, even the bathroom. Nothing. Nobody had seen her leave. Patients swore she'd been there just a minute before. It wasn't until the following morning, when I was tidying up, that I found her name. On the logbook page, dated yesterday, in neat, looping script, was written, "Assisting staff nurse, present all shift." No signature, just those words. I brought it to the director of the clinic, who frowned, flipping through the hiring files. "We haven't had any new nurses," she told me. "We couldn't even get a replacement last month when Carol was out sick." I laughed nervously, insisting she had been there, insisting patients could back me up. The director agreed to ask around. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment she'd been in the room, the way she comforted the girl, the steadiness of her hands. I felt foolish, wondering if stress and exhaustion had broken something in me. But when I went back the next day, patients asked where the nurse had gone. One old fisherman even described her exactly: white uniform, dark hair pulled tightly back, pale as snow. The strangeness didn't end there. Over the next week, the flu worsened. We lost 3 people. It broke me to zip those bags shut. And yet, others who had been near death suddenly improved overnight. Every single one of them, and I swear this is true, claimed that while they were half delirious, they remembered the nurse sitting beside their bed, stroking their hand, whispering, "You'll be all right." None of them recalled me or the other staff. Only her. By then, rumors were flying around town. Some said she was a traveling nurse flown in from Anchorage, but no one ever saw her plane arrive or leave. Others whispered that she was the spirit of a woman who'd died in an epidemic decades earlier. I hated the gossip. I wanted facts. I wrote letters, called state offices, asked about temporary staff placements from 1982. Each time I was told the same thing. No nurse by that description, no records, nothing. One evening, while cleaning the supply cabinet, I pulled out a box of syringes. Beneath it was a scrap of paper folded twice. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Inside were patient notes written in that same neat script from the logbook, but the names didn't match anyone we had treated. They were names I'd never seen before. When I read them out loud to one of the older townsfolk, her face went pale. "Those were the kids from the diphtheria years," she whispered. "All of them buried before you were even born." I wanted to burn the paper, to pretend none of it existed. But I kept it in my desk, unable to throw it away. Each time I looked at it, my chest tightened with the same mixture of fear and gratitude. Because as terrifying as it was not knowing who she was, part of me believed she saved lives that week. 2 months later, the outbreak ended. The clinic settled back into its sleepy rhythm. Still, every now and then, a patient swore they glimpsed her, in a hallway mirror, or walking past the door, or standing quietly by a cot in the night. The staff tried to laugh it off, but no one really did. The logbook remained locked in the director's office, but I knew that page was still there, her handwriting fixed like a scar. Years have passed since then. I don't talk about it much, but when people ask me about the worst days of my career, my mind doesn't go to the funerals or the endless coughing. It goes straight to her. I think about the calm in her eyes, the certainty in her hands, the way she made me feel like I wasn't drowning alone. Sometimes I wonder if she was real and slipped through some crack in the system. But if that were true, why would her notes list children long dead? The strangest part came last year, when I moved houses. While unpacking boxes, I found that folded scrap of paper again, though I swear I had left it locked at the clinic. It was tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in decades. When I unfolded it, the ink was fresher than before, as if it had been written yesterday. And at the bottom, there was a new line that hadn't been there before. "You'll be all right." I sat in silence for a long time. I wanted to throw it in the fire, but my hands wouldn't let me. It felt like a promise, though from whom, I'll never know. That's the truth, the whole of it. I can still see her standing there in white, smiling politely, ready to help, ready to steady my trembling hands. And every so often, when the clinic is quiet and I'm alone with the hum of the machines, I swear I feel the brush of someone's hand against mine, firm and steady, like she never really left. Story number 3. I was 11 the first time I saw them. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, maybe some dream bleeding into the night while I rubbed sleep from my eyes. But no dream could have left the sound of crunching footsteps in the snow so steady, so synchronized, echoing faintly in the stillness outside my window. I pressed my face to the frosted glass, my breath fogging the pain. And that's when I saw them. A line of figures moving together, slow and deliberate, each one carrying a lantern that glowed faintly against the white ground. The sight should have made me run for my parents, but I stayed frozen there, hands pressed flat against the sill. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 8 of them. None of them spoke. The lantern swayed with each step, a perfect rhythm. I remember thinking it was like watching a parade, but one without music, without smiles, without reason. Just silence. They marched past the edge of town, fading into the distance until only the faint orange glow bobbed like fireflies in the dark. The next morning I told my father. He laughed and said I must have been dreaming. Lantern carriers in the middle of nowhere? Who would they be? Outsiders don't wander through in winter, he said, shaking his head. My mother hushed me quickly, worried I'd scare my little sister. But I couldn't let it go. Every time night fell, I found myself watching the edge of the street, waiting. A few days later, the schoolyard was buzzing. A group of kids swore they had seen the same thing. Figures marching in the night. One boy, Adam, said he had even waved at them. They didn't look back, he told us, his eyes wide, but I swear one of them slowed down, like they knew I was watching. Adults laughed it off. Some called it stories kids told to spook each other. But then it happened. Adam went missing. He didn't show up for school one morning, and by the afternoon the whole town was searching. Snowmobiles combed the trails. Men walked in rows with lanterns and rifles. But they found nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something in me said I had to look. I crept from my bed, careful not to wake my sister, and slipped to the window again. My heart slammed in my chest when I saw the line of lanterns moving once more. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Footprints stretching behind them in perfect formation, pressed deep into the snow. And in the middle of that neat line, I saw a smaller set of boots. Adam's boots. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over my chair. Panic set in. I wanted to run to my parents, but my legs felt locked, my throat too tight to shout. I just crouched there in the dark, listening until the crunching of feet faded. The next morning, the search party found something. Out beyond town, Adam's footprints stretched across the snow. Not wandering, not stumbling, just one clean line, perfectly aligned with others, heading straight into the far wilderness. No one could explain it. My father said maybe wind had shifted the snow, erasing other signs, but I had seen it with my own eyes. Adam was walking with them. Rumors spread quickly, even among adults now. Some said the figures were spirits, others swore it was some forgotten tradition of the people who once lived here. I didn't know what to believe, but I felt sick every time night fell. One evening, a week later, I made the mistake of talking too much. I whispered to my sister about the parade, about Adam's footprints. She was only 8, and instead of being afraid, she got excited. "I want to see them," she said. "Maybe they'll let me march too." I told her never to say that again, but the grin on her face haunted me. That night, she disappeared from her bed. I woke to the sound of the floor creaking. I thought it was my father, but when I sat up, my sister's blanket was empty. Panic surged through me. I bolted to the window and my stomach dropped. There she was, walking outside in nothing but her nightgown, bare feet pressing into the snow, moving steadily toward the lanterns waiting at the edge of town. I didn't think. I didn't call for my parents. I threw on my boots and jacket and tore outside after her, The cold bit through me instantly, but adrenaline kept me going. "Claire!" I screamed, my voice breaking. She didn't turn, not once. She just kept walking, her little arms stiff at her sides. The line of lanterns ahead of her swayed gently, waiting. Each figure stood perfectly still, as though they'd stopped to let her catch up. Their lanterns glowed faintly, casting enough light for me to see shapes under their hoods, though never faces. I caught up just as she reached them. I grabbed her wrist and yanked hard. For a moment she resisted like she didn't even know me. Her eyes stared forward, glassy and unfocused. I shouted her name again, shaking her until something seemed to snap. She blinked, looked at me, and screamed. That scream cut through the silent night, and the figures began to move again. Slowly, deliberately, they turned away, lanterns swaying in rhythm, resuming their march. I held onto my sister as tight as I could, dragging her back toward town, never looking away from the retreating glow until it vanished. When we stumbled back inside, my parents were already awake, demanding to know what had happened. I told them everything. My father was furious, accusing me of making up stories that scared Claire into wandering outside. But when I pointed out her bare feet, red and raw from the snow, his anger faltered. My mother just held her close, whispering prayers under her breath. The next day, word spread again. More children claimed they had seen the parade. Some even bragged they wanted to join. Parents started locking doors tighter, keeping kids close at night. But none of it mattered. The figures always came back. One by one, more children disappeared. Not every night, not in a pattern, but enough that fear gripped the town like a vice. Each time the footprints were the same, neat, aligned, leading into the wilderness. I never saw Adam again, or the others. Years passed, but I've never forgotten those nights. I left Dillingham as soon as I was old enough, never looking back. My sister grew up but refuses to talk about it. Sometimes I catch her staring off when lantern light flickers, her jaw tight, her eyes distant. The strangest part, the thing that haunts me most, came decades later. I was visiting my parents' graves back in town, standing at the edge of the cemetery at dusk. Snow was falling lightly, and I thought I was alone. But then I heard it. The crunch of synchronized footsteps in the snow. I turned, heart racing, and saw them again. The same line, the same lanterns swaying, moving just as they had all those years ago, and in the middle of them, walking perfectly in step, was Adam. His boots were the same, his face unchanged, like time had never touched him. I didn't stay to watch them pass. I couldn't. I ran back toward the road, choking on my breath, not daring to look over my shoulder. But I felt it. That pull, that rhythm, like something inside me wanted to fall in line, to match their steps, to carry a lantern of my own. I've never gone back since. I don't think I ever will. But even now, some nights, when I wake in the quiet hours and the world outside is still, I swear I hear it again. The crunch, the rhythm, the silent parade calling me to join. And I know, one day, I might not have the strength to resist. Story number 4. I was halfway through a crossword puzzle when the radio crackled to life with a voice that didn't belong. At first I thought it was just static, some bleed over from another channel, but then I heard it clearly. King Salmon Tower, this is Flight 237. Mayday, Mayday. My pencil froze in my hand. It was nearly midnight, and we had no scheduled flights, no planes in the air. The schedule was clean. I'd checked it twice out of habit. My first thought was a prank, maybe a bored fisherman playing around with radio equipment, but the voice carried that edge I'd heard in real emergencies before. It wasn't joking. It was tight, clipped, and panicked. I pressed the button and answered the way training drilled into me. Flight 237, King Salmon Tower, State your position and nature of emergency." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. There was a pause, just long enough for me to doubt myself, and then the reply came back, garbled but firm. "Engine failure. Losing altitude. I can see the runway lights." My stomach turned. The runway lights were off. I hadn't powered them up. Nobody was cleared to approach. Yet, he was certain. I flicked on the lights anyway, stretching my arm across the panel, bathing the airstrip in that cold, electric glow. If somehow, impossibly, there was a plane out there, I couldn't risk ignoring him. I scanned the radar. Nothing. A blank screen, just the sweep of the line circling, clean and empty. I leaned forward until my nose nearly touched the glass. Still nothing. But his voice came again. "I'm circling. Can't stabilize. Need clearance to land." My throat went dry. If he was circling, I should see it. I looked out through the wide glass panes of the tower. The night stretched out over the snow, the runway glowing faintly, but the sky above was empty. Not a flicker, not a sound. "Flight 237, I don't have you on radar. Can you squawk ident?" I tried to keep procedure, to keep myself anchored. The line hissed, then his reply. "Negative. System's failing. Please, I can't hold this much longer." The tone of his voice lodged itself deep in my chest. It wasn't just fear. It was resignation. I'd heard that tone once before when a small charter went down outside Dillingham years earlier. The hairs on my arms stood up. I wasn't imagining it. He believed he was up there. Minutes dragged. I checked logs, cross-referenced flight numbers, flipped through papers with shaking hands. Flight 237 wasn't on any manifest. Not today, not this week, not ever, at least not in our district. Yet every few seconds, his voice cut in again, calm at times, frantic at others, insisting he was overhead, banking, losing altitude, lining up. My eyes darted between the radar screen and the dark window, my body rigid, every nerve tuned to the possibility of lights appearing out of nowhere. Nothing came. Only his words. Around 1 a.m, his breathing grew labored. I could hear it harsh through the headset. He said, "I see the field. I'm lined up." I sprang from my chair and pressed against the glass, heart hammering. The runway was there, glowing faintly against the dark. No approach lights, no shadow of wings, no sound of engines. Still, I could swear I felt something in the air, a pressure, a weight bearing down, the kind you feel when a plane passes low overhead. I ducked instinctively, though the sky was empty. He shouted something. "Landing now, God help me." And then the radio went dead. No static, no trailing signal. Just silence. I stood frozen, headset clutched to my ear, waiting. I expected an explosion, a crash, the gut-wrenching thud of metal against earth. Nothing came. The airstrip lay still. The radar screen blinked its steady rhythm. The only sound was my own shallow breathing. After 10 minutes of silence, I switched frequencies, called out to Anchorage Center, asked if they had any aircraft in my sector. They didn't. Nothing had flown through King Salmon airspace in hours. I didn't tell them what I'd heard. I couldn't even form the words. When dawn finally scraped light across the tundra, I drove out along the runway in the airport jeep. My eyes scanned every inch, expecting torn asphalt, wreckage, even scorch marks. There was nothing. The ground was smooth, undisturbed. But halfway down, near the approach end, I spotted them. Tracks. Not tire marks, not footprints. Grooves in the snow, deep parallel lines, about as far apart as landing gear would be. They stretched 20 yards, then stopped cold. No skid, no scatter, just ended, like whatever made them had lifted straight back into the air. I crouched down, touched the frozen impressions. They were real. I wasn't imagining them. My fingers shook against the icy ruts. I didn't report it. I told myself it could have been a snowplow, a trick of the night, anything but what I knew deep down. I didn't want to explain to superiors how I'd guided a ghost flight into a runway that no one else saw, but I couldn't shake the voice. It stayed with me, looping in my head. I can see the runway lights. He'd sounded so certain, so human. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the static pop and his final plea. I stopped working crosswords on the night shift after that. My pencil would just tremble in my hand. Weeks later, while shelving old flight logs, I stumbled on something that nearly made me drop the binder. In the back, under accident reports from years earlier, I found a thin file stamped 1964. It listed Flight 237. A small bush plane en route from Anchorage lost contact over Bristol Bay in bad weather. Wreckage never recovered. The pilot's last transmission. King Salmon Tower, I see the field. I'm lined up. My chest hollowed out as I read it, the words exact to what I'd heard that night. The handwriting in the report was old. The paper yellowed. Yet it was identical. I sat in that archive room. For hours, the file spread open, the memory replaying. I tried to tell myself I'd read it before, that my brain had dug it up and spun it into hallucination during the long, lonely shift. But I knew I hadn't. I'd never seen the file. I'd never known those words. And I could still feel that pressure overhead, the heavy nothingness that pressed down on me in the tower window. I never told anyone. Not my co-workers, not my family. It sat in me like a stone. I started avoiding night shifts when I could, swapping with others, making excuses. When I couldn't avoid them, I kept the runway lights off unless absolutely necessary. I left the radio volume lower than regulation allowed, because part of me was terrified I'd hear him again. And another part of me was terrified that if I ignored him, if I didn't answer, I'd doom him to circle forever above a frozen town that couldn't see him. Years have passed. I've worked countless shifts since then, watched real emergencies unfold, guided pilots to safe landings, even dealt with accidents that left wreckage behind to mourn over. But nothing has haunted me like that voice. Sometimes, late at night, I'll sit alone with the radio off and I swear I can still hear faint static, the whisper of a transmission pressing at the edge of silence, waiting for me to answer. And every so often I wonder, if I walked the runway at midnight, with the lights burning, would I see him finally come down? Or would he just keep circling, forever calling into a sky that has no room for him anymore? That's why I'm telling you this now. Because I can't carry it alone anymore. It happened. I swear to you it happened. And every time I pass by that file in the archive, tucked between accidents with real wreckage and real names, I feel like his eyes are still on me, like he's waiting for me to guide him the rest of the way in. Story number 5. I wasn't supposed to be inside that building, and I knew it the second my boots crunched over the warped linoleum tiles. The old elementary school on the edge of Shishmaref had been boarded up for years after the foundation shifted, but for kids like us in 1985, that only made it irresistible. My cousin Danny dared me first, then followed close behind me, his flashlight jittering across the empty hallway like he was nervous too, though neither of us wanted to admit it. The place smelled like dust and wood rot, like something that had been shut away too long. We weren't there to break anything. At least that wasn't the plan. Mostly we wanted to prove we weren't scared, and maybe bring back some kind of trophy to show the others. Everyone in town had whispered about the school. Some said it wasn't empty, not really. Others said kids who wandered in heard things that didn't make sense. I told myself I didn't believe any of it, but I also kept my hands in my coat pockets so no one would see how much they shook. The first couple of classrooms were just what you'd expect. Broken desks, cracked chalkboards, a few tattered books left on the floor like the teachers and students had walked out in the middle of a lesson. We laughed at the drawings stuck to the walls, faded crayon houses and stick figures, almost as if we were in control of the place now. But when we opened the third door, something was different. The desks in that room weren't overturned or scattered. They were neatly in rows, like someone had put them back after everyone left. At first it looked normal, until Danny leaned closer to one desk and said, "Hey, look at this." He ran his finger along a deep scratch carved into the wood. Eliza T. I remember frowning because I didn't recognize the name. We both went from desk to desk, our flashlights bouncing, revealing name after name carved into the surfaces. Some were first and last names, some just initials, but there must have been 24 at least. "Who are these?" I asked, and Danny shrugged like he didn't care, but his voice was thin when he said, "Not anyone from here? I never seen these." We left that night quicker than we meant to, telling ourselves we'd just found old graffiti, nothing more. But the names stuck with me. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about them, so I asked my uncle, who worked for the school district. I said I found some names written on desks in the old building, and I rattled a couple off. He went quiet, just long enough for me to notice, before saying he didn't recognize them either. That pause sat in my stomach like a stone. I tried to let it go, but 2 months later, the first thing happened that made it impossible. A girl named Eliza from a village down the coast was reported missing. The radio announcements gave her name. Eliza T. The same one I'd seen carved into that desk. When I told Danny, he laughed nervously and said, "It's just a coincidence. People got the same names all the time." I wanted to believe him, but when the second name appeared in the news a year later, a boy from Wales, gone without a trace, I remembered seeing his name carved in that same classroom. That's when the fear sank in for real. We stopped talking about it, but I never forgot. Each time a kid went missing from some far-off village, I felt a sick twist in my stomach. I didn't have to check the desks again. I already knew the names were there. By 1987, there were 4 names from those desks that had matched missing children. Nobody else seemed to notice the pattern. One night, Danny came to my house, pale and shaking. He said he'd gone back inside the school alone. I grabbed him by the arm and asked what the hell he was thinking. He wouldn't look at me at first, but finally he said, "There are more names now. Ones I didn't remember before." I didn't want to hear it. I begged him not to drag me back there, but he said, "You have to see it. Otherwise you'll think I'm lying." Against my better judgment, I followed him. The school felt colder that night, though I can't say if it was just the air or my nerves. We walked fast through the halls until we reached that classroom. He was right. The desks had new names scratched into them, at least 6 I'd never seen before. And one of them was mine. I froze. My throat closed up and I swear I couldn't breathe for a moment. Danny tried to laugh it off, like maybe someone was playing a prank. But there was no one else who knew we'd been there, no one who could have carved it. I touched the letters of my name with my fingertip, and the grooves were rough, as if cut recently. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made me jump. I begged my parents to move away, though I never told them why. Danny and I argued about what to do. He said maybe if we sanded down the desks, got rid of the names, it would stop. I told him we shouldn't touch it at all. Finally, I refused to go back with him again. 3 weeks later, Danny disappeared. The town searched everywhere, the shoreline, the tundra, even sending planes overhead. Nothing. No tracks, no belongings, no sign of him. People whispered maybe he fell through thin ice, or maybe he ran away. But I knew. I knew his name had been on those desks too, just like mine. I lived the next year in constant terror, waiting for something to take me. Every time a kid from another village went missing, I felt it like a death knell. My name was still there, waiting. I tried to tell myself maybe it meant something else. Maybe it was only coincidence. But deep down, I didn't believe that. In the winter of 1989, The school finally collapsed under heavy snow and was demolished. Watching the bulldozers tear it apart, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. What if destroying it made things worse? What if the names had to exist somewhere? For a while, the disappearances slowed. I thought maybe it was over. But last year, out of curiosity or madness, I searched the archives at the district office. I found old photographs of the condemned classrooms taken by inspectors before demolition. One shot showed the desks, clearly lit. And there, scratched into the wood, were names that hadn't even been children yet. Kids born years later, still babies at the time of that photo. I sat in that archive room with my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the picture. I saw my own name again, clear as ever, even though I was still alive. And worse, I saw names of kids I knew today, friends of my own children. That was the moment I understood. The names weren't records of the past. They were lists of the future. I've carried this secret for decades now. Danny's family still doesn't know why he vanished, and I could never tell them. I never told my parents. I never told anyone except you now, because the truth is, every missing child that made the news, every devastated family, their names were carved into those desks long before they disappeared. And mine was there too. Why I'm still alive, I don't know. Maybe it skipped me. Maybe it's waiting. But sometimes I dream about that classroom. I see rows of desks in the dark, and the sound of carving, slow and steady, like a knife dragging across wood. When I wake, I feel the grooves under my fingertips. I don't believe the school is gone. Not really. It's somewhere else now, with more desks, more names, and someday, someone will walk inside again and see their own name waiting, just like I did. That's the part that scares me most. Because if it knew my name then, if it knows my children's names now, what's to stop it from knowing yours? Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 6. I woke up to silence that didn't make sense. In Bethel, you get used to background noise even at night. Snow machines, dogs, the occasional ATV going by, the river cracking under ice when it's thaw season. But that morning, the quiet pressed against my ears like someone had stuffed them with cotton. My first thought was that my alarm clock had broken. But when I sat up and checked, the digits blinked normally. It was nearly 10 a.m., way later than I should have slept. And that alone made my stomach knot. I never sleep through anything. Not barking dogs, not wind rattling the windows, not the sirens that test every month. I rolled out of bed and pulled on my socks, frowning at how still everything was. Usually I'd hear my neighbors outside, or kids cutting across yards to the school. But when I glanced out the window, all I saw was water. Not puddles, not melting snow. Water up to the porches, water where the road should have been. It looked like the Kuskokwim River had swallowed the neighborhood. My throat tightened, and I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was still half dreaming. I called out for my mom, but the house stayed quiet. She was gone. My brother's room was empty too, his blankets tossed aside like he'd left in a hurry. I grabbed the cordless phone and tried to call her cell. No service. I walked into the kitchen, the linoleum cold under my feet, and noticed the emergency radio missing from its spot on the counter. That's when it hit me. They had evacuated. Everyone had. Everyone but me. I pressed my forehead against the window pane, heart racing. I should have heard the flood siren. We'd had drills since I was a kid. If the river started rising too fast, the town blasted the signal loud enough to shake the glass. But nothing had woken me. I ran to the front door and opened it. Brackish water lapped at the bottom step, carrying branches and plastic bottles. The whole street was empty. Houses stood dark, vehicles abandoned. Even the dogs that usually barked non-stop were gone. "Hello?" I yelled, my voice cracking. The sound bounced back from the water, sharp and lonely. My hands shook as I tried to think. If the siren failed here, maybe they hadn't known I was left behind. I remembered the community center on higher ground where everyone was supposed to go. That was my only option. I packed a backpack with whatever I could grab: flashlight, sweater, a half-empty box of granola bars, and tried to steady my breathing. As I zipped the bag, something outside caught my eye. A line of wet footprints circled the base of my house, slow and deliberate, as if someone had walked around it again and again. My heart hammered. They weren't shoe prints. They looked bare, long, and uneven. I slammed the door shut and backed into the kitchen, clutching the strap of the bag so tightly my knuckles ached. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe some drunk wandered through after being left behind. Maybe someone was trying to check if anyone was home. But why circle the house like that? Why not knock? I told myself to move. If I froze, I'd stay here until the water rose higher. I waded into the flood, the icy water soaking through my jeans instantly. The cold bit so hard my calves went numb, but I forced myself forward, gripping fences and porch railings as I slogged through the street. My house disappeared behind me, but the image of those prints burned in my mind. The walk that should have taken 15 minutes stretched into an hour. The streets were drowned, landmarks half submerged. I passed trucks stalled at awkward angles, mailboxes bent under the weight of floating debris, and houses with doors left wide open. I called out more than once, but nobody answered. My teeth chattered, partly from cold, partly from the fear creeping deeper with every step. When I reached the rise near the edge of town, I almost cried in relief at the sight of the community center. But the parking lot was empty. No kids kicking gravel, no parents smoking outside. The doors hung wide open like a mouth. I ran inside, dripping water across the floor. The gym smelled of damp wood and cleaning fluid, but it was silent. Folding chairs sat in rows, abandoned mid-meeting. A child's jacket lay crumpled on the bleachers. It looked like everyone had been there, and then vanished at once. "Mom?" I whispered, voice breaking in the hollow room. Something creaked above me. I jerked my head up. The balcony that overlooked the gym stood empty. I told myself it was the building settling. Still, I grabbed a metal chair leg to use as a weapon, holding it like a bat. My pulse thudded so hard it made my fingertips tingle. I decided to check the office, thinking maybe someone left notes or a radio. The hallway stretched too long, my footsteps echoing off the walls. A wet print smeared across the tile. Not mine, not fresh, but not old either. It dragged from the front door toward the office. I wanted to turn back, but something pulled me forward, a desperate need to understand what had happened. The office door was half shut. I nudged it open with the chair leg, the hinges groaning. Inside, the desk lamp glowed, though no one sat there. Papers littered the floor, water stained. On the desk lay the emergency siren control panel, a red switch flipped down. It hadn't malfunctioned. It had been turned off. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. Someone had silenced the warning. I thought of the footprints around my house, the silence of the whole neighborhood. Someone hadn't wanted me, or anyone, to wake up. I grabbed the desk phone, but the line was dead. The radio was smashed, wires splayed like veins. My throat tightened as I realized the truth. This wasn't an accident. Someone had made sure I'd been left behind. I bolted back into the gym, heart slamming, trying to decide whether to stay inside or head for the airstrip. That's when I heard water dripping. Steady, unnatural, too heavy for just a leak. I followed the sound against my better judgment. Near the supply closet, the floor was slick, and the footprints reappeared, circling, looping, like whoever made them had walked for hours without leaving. I shoved the door open, bracing myself. The closet was empty except for stacked cots and blankets, but on the back wall, scratched deep into the wood, were words. "Stay asleep." My chest tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. I staggered back, nearly falling over the prints. I ran, I didn't care where, just away from the center. The water outside had risen higher, swallowing the streetlights. My legs ached from wading, but I pushed towards the airstrip. My brain raced through questions. Where had everyone gone? Who had written that message? Why me? But every thought blurred into one terror. I wasn't supposed to be awake. When I reached the airstrip, the planes were gone, the hangar doors open. An overturned luggage cart floated near the runway. I climbed onto it, panting, my body shivering uncontrollably. That's when I saw them. Figures standing far out where the water met the tundra. Dozens, maybe more. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood in a crooked line, half submerged. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I scrambled off the cart, running toward the terminal. The doors banged in the wind. Inside, it was dark except for the glow of the vending machine. I collapsed against it, sobbing, unable to stop shaking. That's when I heard my mother's voice. "Anna?" It came from down the corridor, soft, urgent, the way she used to call me when I'd forgotten my gloves. My chest filled with relief, and I stumbled toward the sound, calling her name. But the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The voice didn't echo. It repeated the same word, "Anna," at the same pitch, like a recording. I froze. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn back. And then I saw the wet footprints again, circling the terminal entrance in endless loops. I forced myself to back away, step by step, until I was outside again, until the cold air stung my face, and the silence pressed back in. The figures in the water were gone. Only ripples marked where they had stood. I don't remember how I made it out of Bethel. Pieces of that day blur together. The Coast Guard helicopter picking me up from the roof of the school, the faces of soldiers who looked at me like I was half-crazed. They told me the town had been evacuated at dawn, that the sirens had gone off exactly as planned. Everyone had made it to safety. Everyone but me. When I asked why the system in my neighborhood failed, they looked at each other and shrugged. "Sometimes signals don't carry," one of them said. But I saw the panel. Someone had turned it off. I showed them the scratches in the wood, the footprints, begged them to believe me. They said I was in shock. That stress made me see things. It's been years now, but I can't forget. I still wake up in the night convinced I hear water lapping at my window. And sometimes, when I step outside in fresh snow, I swear I see a second set of prints beside mine. They circle once, twice, and then vanish, as if reminding me I was never meant to wake up that morning. Story number 7. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was already 30 miles past Nome, my truck groaning under a half-frozen load of supplies bound for Teller. I'd been on that road plenty of times before, though not often in winter, and I knew it wasn't a forgiving stretch. Ice hummed under my tires, the kind of vibration you can feel in your ribs. My CB was quiet, which I liked. No chatter meant no one nearby. But in the back of my mind, there was this whisper that I wasn't as alone as I should have been. The dashboard clock flicked to 11:07 p.m., and that's when the CB lit up with static. Not the normal kind, not just background crackle. It was like someone pressed the mic, breathed heavy, then let go. I froze with my hand on the wheel. I hadn't touched my radio, and no one was supposed to be this far out at that hour. I turned the volume down to nothing, then back up again. Silence. Just me and the drone of the engine. I told myself it was nothing, just interference. But the thought stuck. The air felt occupied. When I reached the frozen ridge near Lost River, I saw lights ahead. 2 beams, bright, bouncing in the dark like another rig coming toward me. Relief hit me. I wasn't the only fool on the road tonight. But as I slowed, the lights didn't grow clearer. They flickered like headlights trying to cut through water. Then, just as my own beams caught them full on, they vanished. Not faded, not turned. Gone. My chest locked up. I sat there staring at the empty road, my breath fogging the cab. My truck idled like nothing happened, but I knew what I'd seen. By the time I rolled into Teller, it was close to midnight. Or at least I thought I did. The strangest thing is that I remember the entry sign, the dark cluster of houses, the one sodium street lamp buzzing like a trapped bee. But no one came out. No dogs barked. No lights turned on in any window. The streets were quiet. Too quiet for a place that small. I parked outside the supply shed, climbed down, and stomped my boots hard on the ground just to hear something alive. My cargo sat in back, untouched. The lock gleamed in my flashlight beam. That's when I noticed it, the snow on the road behind me. No tire tracks, none from me, none from anyone else. I whipped around, shining the flashlight along the ground. My truck was there, solid, engine humming, exhaust fogging the night. But the road looked smooth, undisturbed, like I hadn't driven it at all. My throat went dry. I tried to reason it out. Drift, wind, ice covering the tracks. But the snow was packed hard, like glass. There was nothing to cover. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and tried the CB. Breaker 19, this is North Star Hauler. Anyone got your ears on? My voice came out shaky, too fast. Static. Then, under it, my own words came back, warped and slow. Ears on. Ears on. I gripped the mic and dropped it like it burned. The echo died out, but the silence it left was worse. I decided I wasn't sticking around. Teller could unload their own damn cargo in the morning. I turned the wheel, shifted into gear, and pressed down on the accelerator. The truck didn't move. The engine revved, the gears clunked, but I stayed put like my tires were welded to the ground. I checked the brake, the clutch, tried again. Nothing. Sweat broke across my forehead, cold and sticky under my cap. The CB came alive again. This time, it was a voice. My voice. You're not going back. It was flat, toneless, but I knew it. Every syllable was mine. I fumbled for the keys, yanked them out, killed the engine. The truck stilled, but the CB kept humming. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. Then I heard footsteps outside. Crunching, steady, circling the cab. I forced myself to look through the side mirror, but there was nothing there. Just the faint glow of that one street lamp, haloing empty snow. The footsteps stopped at my door. A knock followed. One sharp rap, not rushed, not polite. My hands shook so bad I could hardly hold the door handle shut. When I dared to lean closer to the glass, my breath froze in my throat. It wasn't a person outside. It was me. Standing there, same jacket, same gloves, same hat pulled low. My own face peering in, pale and stiff, eyes too wide, mouth moving with no sound. My body locked. I couldn't even scream. I just sat there staring at myself, wondering if my heart would punch through my ribs. Then, just as sudden, the glass fogged white like someone exhaled against it. By the time I blinked, the figure was gone. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time stretched like the road itself. At some point, I turned the key again. The engine roared back, smooth as ever. My tires gripped like they should have all along. I shifted, pressed the gas, and the truck rolled forward. The relief that hit me was so sharp I laughed out loud. But it didn't last. Halfway out of Teller, the CB clicked on again. This time the channel wasn't empty. Voices filled it, men, women, kids, all layered over each other, laughing, crying, whispering. My ears strained to catch words, but they slid over one another, tangled like fishing line. Then one cut through clear. It was me again. You didn't leave. You never left. I pulled the mic cord straight out of the set. Silence. The dash lights flickered once, then held. I gripped the wheel with both hands and didn't look anywhere but forward. I made it back to Nome, or at least I think I did. The station lights glowed. Familiar faces waved. Someone even helped unload my cargo. But no one looked me in the eye for more than a second. And the strangest thing? They all acted like they'd seen me days ago, rolling into Teller, then vanishing on the way back. For weeks after, I didn't touch the CB, didn't get near my truck after dark. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the cold had messed with my brain. But one night, while I was sitting at home, trying to drown the memory with cheap whiskey, the radio on my counter crackled. Not the CB, just a busted FM set I hadn't touched in months. And out of it came my voice again, clear as a bell. Still out here. That was the last time I doubted what happened. Teller isn't a place I'll ever see again. I left the hauling job, sold the rig, and packed my life as far from that road as I could. But every winter, when the snow piles high and the nights stretch long, I swear I hear the static build in the walls of whatever house I'm in. Sometimes, if I sit real still, I hear the knock at the door too. And every time, I wonder if it's me standing on the other side, waiting to tell myself the one thing I don't want to believe, that I never made it back at all. Story number 8. I was kneeling on the ice with my hands numb inside my mittens when I first noticed it. We'd been cutting holes all morning, me and my cousin Eric, and the rhythm of auger-biting ice had become so familiar that I nearly ignored the faint smear of color just beneath the surface. At first, I thought it was rust from an old barrel, maybe some trash left in the lagoon years back. But the red streak didn't fade as the ice shavings blew over it. It seemed almost embedded, like veins frozen beneath glass. I called Eric over, trying to sound casual but feeling a twist in my gut. He crouched, pressed his gloved hand flat, and squinted through the thin white layer. "That's not rust," he muttered, then looked at me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. We chipped at the ice, widening the hole carefully, both of us expecting maybe a dead seal, maybe a spilled drum of something nasty from the old canneries. But when the water finally seeped up into the circle and the frozen streaks thawed enough to show form, I saw hair. Dark, matted hair pressed flat against the ice. My throat closed up. Eric swore under his breath and scrambled back on his knees. I leaned closer, unwilling to believe what I was seeing until the face appeared. Bloated, pale, features distorted but human. The ice had preserved it like some horrible museum display. The worst part wasn't even the face itself, but the fact that I didn't recognize it. In a place like Kotzebue, you knew everyone, or at least knew someone who did. This wasn't one of ours. Eric wanted to leave it alone, report it straight to the troopers. But I couldn't stand up. My legs felt heavy, my eyes locked on the body beneath. There was something about the angle, the head turned upward, the mouth slightly open as if still gasping. It was like the ice was holding the person captive in that last desperate moment. I finally forced myself to back away, my boots slipping slightly on the wet surface. Eric's voice shook when he said, "We can't be the only ones to see this. Someone has to come." We trudged back to town, silence thick between us. Every sound felt sharper. The crunch of snow under our boots, the rasp of our breath. When we got to the station and told the trooper on duty, his face went stiff, and he called in the others. Within an hour, they were out at the lagoon, breaking more ice, pulling the body up with ropes and a stretcher. I stood back, half hoping it would turn out to be some old accident victim, someone we'd all just forgotten. But the murmurs started immediately. No one could place the face. No missing person matched. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the image of the hair under the ice. I told myself it was just shock, that tomorrow life would return to normal. But the next morning, when I stopped by the store, people were already whispering. Some claimed the clothes on the body weren't local, that the jacket looked store-bought from down south. Others swore they'd seen tracks near the lagoon that didn't match any boots they knew. Days passed, and the troopers couldn't identify the body. No records, no missing reports. It was as if the person had been erased from everywhere else and dumped here. That's when the atmosphere in town shifted. People avoided the lagoon. Parents kept kids indoors. Even the usual sounds, dogs barking, snow machines running, seemed subdued. I tried to shake it off, but something clung to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mouth open under the ice, frozen mid-breath. One evening, Eric came over with a bottle, clearly rattled. He confessed he'd been dreaming about the lagoon, about the body staring at him through the ice. "It's like it knows us," he said, his hands trembling. I wanted to laugh it off, but the truth was, I'd been dreaming too. In mine, the face wasn't beneath the ice anymore. It was floating beside my bed, dripping water, whispering words I couldn't quite hear. A week later, the troopers shipped the body to Anchorage for forensic analysis. I thought maybe that would end it. That distance would break the spell. But the night after it left, something happened that still makes my skin crawl. I was walking home late, the sky clear, the snow crisp beneath my boots. When I reached the edge of the lagoon, I saw fresh footprints leading onto the ice. They weren't mine, and they weren't Eric's. We hadn't been back since. The tracks went straight to the hole we'd cut. My heart hammered as I followed them, against every instinct. The ice groaned under me, and I stopped at the edge, staring down. The hole was refrozen, but thinner than the rest, as if someone had been at it again. I bent closer, and that's when I heard it. A faint knocking, like something tapping against the underside of the ice. I staggered back, slipping, my breath caught in my throat. I ran home that night, door bolted behind me, and didn't tell anyone what I'd heard. But I didn't sleep either. The knocking had followed me into my dreams, louder, sharper, echoing like a heartbeat. I woke up drenched in sweat, convinced someone had been outside my window. Eric came by the next day, pale and hollow-eyed. He'd heard it too. The knocking. He swore it came from his floorboards, that he'd nearly torn the carpet up trying to find the source. We sat at my table, neither of us drinking our coffee, both too afraid to admit how bad it had gotten. "What if it wants us?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. 2 weeks after the body left town, a trooper called to say they'd run every test, checked every database. Nothing. No match. The corpse might as well have been born and died in that lagoon. When Eric heard, he slammed his fist against the wall and muttered that we should have left it under the ice. By then, things were unraveling. Kids in town complained of nightmares about drowning. Dogs refused to go near the lagoon. An elder woman swore she saw a figure walking across the ice at dawn, barefoot, leaving no tracks. I tried to bury myself in work, but the knocking never left me. It followed me everywhere, even into daylight. One night, unable to take it anymore, I dragged Eric back to the lagoon. I told him we had to face it, to see if something remained. We trudged out under a dull moon, the air so still I could hear my heartbeat. The ice cracked faintly under our boots, and I stopped at the old hole. It looked ordinary, sealed over by fresh freeze. But then the sound began again. That steady, muffled knocking, like someone begging to be let out. Eric dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against the ice. His eyes widened, and he whispered, "It's saying my name." Before I could stop him, he pulled out his auger and started cutting. I grabbed his arm, shouted at him, but he was wild, muttering that he had to know. The auger tore through the ice, shards flying, water bubbling up. And then, just as the hole widened, a hand broke the surface. I froze. It was gray, swollen, nails cracked, but it clutched Eric's sleeve with impossible strength. He screamed, tried to pull back, but the grip dragged him toward the hole. I lunged, grabbed his other arm, and pulled with everything I had. His eyes met mine, wide and pleading, as the water surged. For a moment I thought I'd lose him. But then the ice beneath cracked further, splintering with a sound like a gunshot. He slipped free, and we both tumbled back across the surface. The hand vanished, the water stilled. The knocking stopped. We lay there panting, staring at the hole as it began to freeze over again, sealing itself like nothing had happened. We never told anyone what we saw. When people asked why we looked so haunted, we just shrugged. A month later, the troopers stopped calling. The body was buried in an unmarked grave, officially unidentified. But I know better. That wasn't just some stranger frozen in the lagoon. It had been waiting, and we'd let it out, if only for a moment. Even now, years later, I can still feel the weight of that hand pulling at me, the cold water tugging at my ankles. Eric left Kotzebue not long after, said he couldn't stay. I stayed, but I never go near the lagoon. Sometimes, though, when the nights are silent, I hear it again. The faintest knock, like a reminder that it isn't gone. It's just waiting, under the ice, patient as the winter itself. And if I'm being honest with you, I don't think it wanted Eric that night. I think it wanted me. Story number 9. I remember the sound first, that high whine of an engine left running in the cold, steady and unnatural in its persistence. I had just finished stacking supplies by the shed when I noticed it, echoing through the line of spruce trees behind camp. It was already late. Most of the guys had eaten and turned in, and the steady hum carried like a nagging reminder that someone had forgotten to shut their machine off. I followed it because I knew who had gone out last. Eddie. He was supposed to be back before dusk, just a quick run for fuel drums from the river landing. He wasn't the type to dawdle, and hearing that sound raised a weight in my gut that I couldn't shake. When I came through the trees, the beam of his snow machine's headlight cut straight through the dark, fixed and unwavering like an unblinking eye. The machine was parked oddly, angled against a drift, still purring, exhaust fogging around it. Eddie wasn't there. I called his name, half expecting him to step out from behind a tree with that lazy grin of his. Nothing answered but the soft choke of the engine. My voice came out again, sharper, louder, but the woods had that heavy stillness, the kind that made every syllable fall flat. I walked a circle around the machine, footprints crunching in the crust, but his tracks stopped just a few yards away, swallowed in the confusion of snow and broken brush. The thing that unsettled me wasn't just the missing rider. It was the trees around the clearing. Several had fresh axe marks, raw wood exposed, chips scattered in the snow. Eddie had no axe with him. He was hauling drums, not cutting timber. I touched one of the cuts, flakes still damp as if made minutes before, and pulled my hand back quick. Something about it felt wrong. We all knew the routine out there. No one swung steel unless it was planned, logged, and accounted for. Those marks weren't ours. And Eddie, God help me, wasn't anywhere in sight. I killed the engine, the silence slamming down so hard my ears rang. I remember standing there, listening, my breath making the only movement in the cold air. I thought about heading back to camp for help, but leaving that machine idling in the dark, with Eddie nowhere near it, felt like abandoning him. I pulled a flashlight from my coat and aimed it into the trees. The beam caught only more bark scars, more clean axe cuts, all at shoulder height, lined like a path deeper into the woods. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my neck. I knew I should turn back, but I couldn't. He was my friend. I started walking. Every step forward crunched too loudly, as though the snow wanted to betray me. My light bounced from trunk to trunk, each one showing the same rough gash, as if someone had hacked out a trail not meant for any road. I muttered Eddie's name, not so much to call him, but to reassure myself I still had a voice. The longer I walked, the clearer it became that the cuts weren't random. They angled slightly right, guiding me toward something. I could feel it in my stomach, the same way you know when a path isn't just made by animals, but by intent. My mouth dried until my tongue stuck to my teeth. After maybe 10 minutes, I found the first glove. Eddie's glove. Orange leather, split at the seam. It was hanging from a splinter in one of the marked trees, almost placed there. I touched it with my finger, half expecting it to twitch like some prank, but it was stiff with frost. My chest tightened. He'd been here. He'd been close. And he'd left something behind, not dropped it, but left it, like a marker. I stuffed the glove in my pocket, turned, and realized the silence had changed. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't silence anymore. It was listening. The woods felt like they were holding breath. I spun my light in a wide arc, desperate for movement, but the snow lay untouched except for the scars on the trees. And then, faintly, came the rhythm. Chop. Pause. Chop. Not echoing, not distant, but deliberate and close, like someone splitting wood just out of reach of the light. My skin prickled hot despite the cold. I crouched low, breath hissing through my teeth, ears straining. Chop! Chop! Each swing steady, measured, but I couldn't place the direction. The sound slipped between trunks like it belonged to all of them. I whispered Eddie's name one last time, but my voice cracked. Whoever was out there wasn't him. I backed up, slow, careful not to trip, until my boots found my own tracks. My instinct screamed at me to run, but fear had a way of freezing the muscles. My flashlight flickered once, weak battery, and I nearly sobbed at the thought of being left blind. I turned toward camp, every nerve screaming, and forced myself to walk fast but not sprint. Behind me, the chopping sound stopped. Dead. The silence grew so thick it felt like a hand on my mouth. Then came the crunch of snow, steady, deliberate, following. That broke me. I ran. Branches whipped my arms, my boots slipped, but I didn't stop until the glow of camp lights broke through the trees. I stumbled into the clearing, gasping, and yelled until throats came out of the bunkhouse. They surrounded me quick, men in coats, questions flying. I couldn't answer properly. I just kept pointing back toward the trees, shaking my head, trying to form the word Eddie. Finally, two of the older guys, Carl and Jim, grabbed rifles and flashlights, and with 4 more behind them, they followed my tracks back toward the snow machine. When we arrived, the machine sat where I'd left it, dead and cold. No fresh tracks circled it except ours. But the axe marks on the trees, there were more. New ones. shiny and wet as if someone had been working them while I was gone. Carl cursed low, scanned the ground, and muttered that we were heading back, no questions. Nobody argued. Not that night. The next day, daylight revealed even more. The axe marks stretched for yards, dozens of them, lined in uneven paths leading nowhere. And there, nailed into a trunk with a clean wedge cut, was Eddie's other glove. Everyone saw it. Nobody touched it. We searched until dark. Men spread through the woods, calling his name, firing rounds into the air. Nothing answered. Nothing ever did. For weeks after, the camp carried a weight none of us spoke of. We kept to groups, we worked faster, and nobody ventured alone into the trees. The foreman called the troopers, of course, but by the time they flew in, all the snow was scarred with too many tracks, ours and otherwise. They took statements, shook their heads, and filed their reports. Missing person. That was all Eddie became. A line on a page. To us, he was the man whose machine kept running, whose gloves showed up where they shouldn't, whose last trail was carved in wood by hands none of us saw. I tried to forget it, but the sound still comes back in dreams. Chop. Pause. Chop. Sometimes I wake with my hands clenched so tight my nails draw blood. I never went back to that camp after the season ended. I left logging altogether. The others scattered too, drifting to jobs in towns far away. But every so often, when I hear an axe strike wood, I freeze like I'm back there, flashlight shaking, waiting for Eddie to step out but knowing deep down he never will. I kept that first glove. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself it was real, maybe because part of me thought he left it for me. Sometimes I take it out of the drawer, stiff and cracked with age, and I wonder if I should have followed the axe marks farther. If I had, maybe I would have found him. Or maybe I wouldn't be here to tell you this at all. Either way, the woods out near Hoona still have a piece of him, carved deep into the trees, waiting for the next fool to listen. Story number 10. I was 13 when it happened, old enough to remember every detail and still too young to make sense of it. People in Nome always told us to respect storms, to never underestimate how quickly they could turn on you. That winter of 1980 was the worst I'd seen. The blizzards came hard, swallowing up the streets, burying cars, and making the world feel smaller than the inside of your own parka. But what stuck with me wasn't the snow itself. It was what happened to my friend Aaron, the night he didn't come home. I wasn't with him when he vanished, and I've lived with that guilt ever since. We'd been walking home from the rec center earlier in the evening. He lived a few blocks past me, near the cannery that had shut down years earlier. We were joking about the basketball game we'd played, about how his shot still curved like a bent fishing pole, and I could see the storm thickening over the rooftops. My mom had told me to be back before dark. I split off toward my street, and he gave me a quick wave, pulling his scarf higher as the snow whipped against us. That was the last time I saw him alive. The blizzard slammed down not long after. By morning, his parents had called half the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen him. I remember standing at our kitchen window, listening to my mom talk on the phone, her face pale. I knew before she hung up that something was wrong. The town organized a search party that same day. I begged my dad to let me go with him, and he finally agreed, probably thinking it'd keep me from pacing the house like a caged animal. We combed through snowdrifts, yards, and alleys, calling Aaron's name into the wind. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the air stung every bit of skin it touched. After hours of searching, someone shouted from near the cannery. We all hurried over, boots crunching, hearts pounding, and that's when I saw them, Aaron's boots. They were side by side, toes pointing toward the cannery wall, perfectly placed as if he'd just stepped out of them. The snow around them was untouched except for the tracks that led straight to where they sat. The prints stopped there. No trail forward, no sign of him turning back, nothing. I felt sick looking at them. My dad muttered something about how maybe Aaron had stumbled inside barefoot, though the doors were locked and boarded up. Others tried to tell themselves he'd gotten confused and wandered off, but we all saw the tracks. They ended like he'd been swallowed by the air itself. The search went on for days. Dogs were brought in, the Coast Guard even helped, but there was no sign of him. No body, no clothing, not even a glove. The town mourned him, but I couldn't let it go. That night after the boots were found, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them lined up in the snow, waiting. I kept hearing my own footsteps crunching behind his, though I hadn't been there. Around midnight, I pulled on my jacket and sneaked out the back door. The storm had calmed into a stillness that felt unnatural. I told myself I just needed to see it again, to make it real, to stop my brain from replaying it. The cannery loomed at the edge of town, a hulking shape with broken windows covered in frost. When I reached it, the boots were still there, half buried now. I crouched down and stared at them, running my gloved fingers over the leather. They were his, no doubt. I whispered his name like maybe he'd step out from behind the building. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The snow around the boots wasn't just smooth. It was packed hard, almost unnaturally flat, as if pressed from underneath. A creak came from inside the cannery. I froze, heart thudding in my ears. The place had been sealed for years, but the sound was clear, like a door shifting on its hinges. Against every bit of better judgment, I tried one of the side doors. To my surprise, it gave way, screeching as it opened. The air inside was colder than outside, a heavy, damp cold that clung to my lungs. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The building smelled of rust and wet wood. My boots echoed on the concrete floor, and I remember whispering Aaron's name again, voice shaking. That's when I saw prints in the thin layer of frost on the ground. Bare footprints, small ones, the size of a child's. They led deeper into the cannery, toward the old processing floor. I followed, each step feeling heavier, like the air thickened the further I went. The prints ended at a hatch in the floor, one I hadn't noticed before. It was cracked open, frost clinging to its edges. I crouched, my light trembling, and saw a ladder descending into darkness. The smell that rose up was metallic and sour. I should have turned back. I should have run. But all I could think was that maybe Aaron was down there. Maybe he'd slipped, gotten trapped. I climbed down. The ladder was slick with ice, and my gloves stuck to the rungs. At the bottom was a narrow tunnel, walls of concrete beaded with condensation. My light flickered, as if the cold was draining its power. The tunnel stretched further than seemed possible under the cannery. I walked slowly, my breath loud in the silence, and then I heard it. Footsteps behind me. I whipped around, light shaking, but the tunnel was empty. Only my own prints trailed back to the ladder. I kept moving, though every instinct screamed to leave. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a chamber, and that's when I saw them. Shoes. Dozens of them, lined neatly along the wall. Boots, sneakers, sandals, some worn, some nearly new. Each pair was placed with care, side by side, toes forward, just like Aaron's. My throat closed. I stumbled forward, shining the light over them, and then I saw something worse. The walls were scratched with names, hundreds of them etched deep into the concrete with something sharp. I ran my fingers over one of them and felt ice burning into my skin. Aaron's name was there. Freshly scratched, jagged letters still flaking white powder. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd collapse. Then I heard breathing. Slow, ragged, coming from the dark corner of the chamber. My light swung toward it, catching the faint outline of a figure crouched low. Bare skin gleamed in the frost, and I realized with horror it was a child-sized shape. Not Aaron, but something smaller. Thinner, its limbs bent at angles that weren't right. It hissed when the light hit it, and I stumbled back, my foot crunching on the ice. The sound made it rise, jerking upward, head cocked like it was sniffing me out. I turned and ran, the beam bouncing wildly, my own panicked sobs echoing. I scrambled up the ladder, tearing my glove as I clawed my way out. I didn't stop until I burst back into the night air, gasping, boots pounding the snow. The hatch slammed behind me on its own. I swear I heard it. I ran all the way home, bursting through the door, startling my parents awake. I didn't tell them everything, just that I'd gone to the cannery and it scared me. They grounded me, of course, but that was better than the truth. I never went back. Years passed. Aaron was declared legally dead. His family moved away. The boots were taken as evidence, but eventually returned. His mother kept them on a shelf until the day she left town. I tried to forget, but sometimes I'd wake in the night convinced I still heard footsteps crunching in snow outside my window. When I was older, I worked briefly with a local crew that handled building inspections. We had to check abandoned structures, and one day we were assigned to the cannery. My stomach turned the second I saw it on the list. I tried to trade shifts, but no one would. I went with 2 others, both older men. We pried open the same side door I had all those years before. Inside, it was the same, damp, cold, empty. I prayed the hatch was gone, buried in concrete, but when we reached the floor, it was still there. I didn't want to open it, but one of the men forced it up with a crowbar. The ladder was gone. Just a black hole with ice crusted around the rim. We shone lights down, but the beam seemed swallowed by nothing. One of the men muttered that the ground must have shifted, sealed it off. But as we stood there, I swear I felt a gust rise from below, carrying with it the faintest whisper of breath. That night, I dreamt of the shoes lined along the wall, and when I woke, my feet were ice cold, like I'd been walking barefoot in snow. I pulled the covers tight and sat listening for hours, straining against the silence. Now, decades later, I still can't bring myself to step near that cannery. Most of it collapsed after storms, but people say the foundation remains, half buried in snow. Sometimes kids dare each other to sneak in, just like we did. I want to warn them, but how can I explain what I saw without sounding insane? All I know is this: Aaron didn't wander off and freeze. He didn't run away. Something took him, the same thing that took whoever owned those other shoes, and it waits in the cold, patient as the snow itself. I think about the night I found his boots lined so neatly in front of that wall, and how the tracks ended like he'd stepped into nothing. The truth is, he didn't vanish into the storm. He stepped out of this world, straight into the one that lives beneath our feet, and I was the only one who ever followed his trail. And if you ever find boots in the snow, perfectly placed, don't look for where they went. Just turn around. Don't give whatever waits down there another name to carve into its wall. That's the end of our 10 Alaskan horror stories. Which one sent chills down your spine? If you made it this far, drop "The ice is watching" in the comments. And remember, in Alaska's silence, something is always listening.